If you listen to the last Go Pitch Yourself episode and have clarity around the types of shows that you should be guesting on, and now you're wondering, well, how do I find those shows? This episode is for you because we are digging into podcast databases and networking sites that connect podcast guests to podcast hosts. Let's do this. Hey there, pitches. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Go Pitch Yourself. I am your host, Angie Trueblood, the founder of the Podwize Group, which is a podcast marketing agency. And fun fact, still aligned with our theme of this Summer Lovin series, one of my neighbors is cutting their grass and weed eating. I don't think you can hear it right now because they seem to have paused, but I'm sure it will be back up and running in no time. So let's just see how astute your hearing is on this podcast, okay? So I'm really excited to be updating today's episode. This was a really popular episode back when we originally launched it. And I brought on our former teammate and my friend, Kim Stewart, to really chat through some of the databases and networking sites that we were seeing that were aiming to pair podcast guests with podcast hosts. Now, I will tell you, I have not seen a big shift in the market and therefore in the content that we shared with you earlier. There is a lot of movement with PodMatch. So I actually interviewed Alex Sanfilippo back on episode 96, where we took a deep dive into his podcast guest interview on Entrepreneurs on Fire. So he actually paid an appearance fee to guest on John Lee Dumas's podcast, which, fun fact, I'm quite sure that is the podcast that was being touted a month ago as being for sale, which is really interesting. So we'll have to keep you updated on that. I haven't seen any insight that it has been sold. It wasn't even named as the podcast that was being sold, but all of the descriptors seem to point in that direction. Anywho, go listen definitely to episode 96 if you didn't hear it when it originally came out. It's during the series that we had on podcast guesting appearance fees and if you should be paying for podcast interviews. Alex was so gracious to come on the show and really allow me to ask all the questions that I had, which I was channeling you, picturing what questions you might have. So it was a really great interview. And he dug into and shared a lot about PodMatch and how it has evolved over time and how he has introduced a couple of features to really pay back podcasters. So definitely check that out. If you are interested in joining PodMatch to test it out, I do have an affiliate link. You can go over to joinpodmatch.com/Podwize, Podwize. And I worked out an arrangement to where you will, so typically when you sign up as an affiliate, which once you join, you can do that as well, you can get a 20% commission anytime anyone uses your affiliate link. But I worked out a really sweet deal, my friend, to where you can get 10% off of the regular price, and then I will get a 10% commission. So I kind of chose that option for you, my listener. So if it's something that you're thinking might be a benefit, then definitely go hop over and get that discount using joinpodmatch.com/Podwize. So this episode, like I said, is really going over some of the networking sites, some of the matching platforms. The one thing that I will say I have seen change is I have become more aware of what is going on in the space, what types of competitors there are, especially as we are really focusing on the agency and the client side of the business. And there's a lot of disparity even in pricing. I just had a call last week with someone who is now a client, but she had looked at a different service and they were going to be charging, I think, $850 a month to find her podcast interviews, which is significantly less than we charge. And she was really looking at what's the disparity in pricing. And as we reviewed their site and we talked about some of the interactions that she had had with them, even them sort of putting forth the types of verticals that they would be pitching her to, they just didn't really make sense with her business. And so I think you really, as you're looking at ways to help you fill that gap of knowing the types of shows that you need to guest on, but then finding those shows so that you can actually pitch them, is keeping front of mind how relational is this opportunity, right? Is it just transactional to where you go in, you search, you find the contact information, and then you pitch, which is great. That's what we do a lot of times internally if we don't have relationships with the host. But what I would encourage you to do, especially if you're just getting started, is look for opportunities to where you can create a relationship with who it is you're pitching. So PodMatch allows that. Their platform is really user-friendly. The podcast collaboration space that I mentioned in this episode, it's a Facebook group. That right there signals there's a bit of community baked into it. So I really like those opportunities to where if you're newer in the space, growing that network is almost just as important as having one-off podcast interviews, right? Getting entrenched and surrounded by people who might invite you to be a guest on their show or who might know people where you would be a good fit as a guest on their show is really important. So don't discount the non-transactional opportunities. In the beginning, it might take a little bit more legwork on your end to form those relationships, but the basis of everything that we do with clients is relationship based. And so I highly encourage you to kind of adopt that premise as you dig into pitching yourself. Okay. The only other thing I wanted to mention, and if you follow me on LinkedIn, you have seen this. So for our 100th episode, I had this really incredible idea that I wanted to do a listener survey to get a sense of what you wanted to see for the show as we move forward. So I created a survey. I thought I will just share it on the 100th episode. I'm not going to share it on social because I don't want people who don't listen to the podcast to actually complete it. I think I shared it in an email. Anywho, that was a hearty fail, which is fine. One of you, my sweet listener, filled out the survey from the actual episode. I have since had people fill it out that have seen it on LinkedIn. I think I put it in a newsletter, which I will do when I send out info on this episode. But if you have not filled out the Go Pitch Yourself listener survey, would you please do that for me so that I know what you love about the show, things that you would like me to do more of, less of? I want to hear all the things. So you can get that survey at thepodwizegroup.com. So Podwize with a Z, group.com/listener23. I mean, I say it's short. It is a short survey, but I am asking you to think, like, what would you like to see? What have you not enjoyed, right? So I would really appreciate it. And then once I have a number of responses that have any sort of statistical significance, I will report the findings back to you, and you will see, hopefully, some changes that maybe you requested as we go into the fall. All right, my friend, without further ado, here is our conversation with myself and Kim Stewart all about podcast databases and networking sites. Okay, so now we are going to dig into these podcast networks and databases with a bit of a critical eye. I'm just being honest, we are. Kim and I are being very candid with you. A lot of them are software as a service or SaaS products that give you the ability to search, network, pitch podcast guests, and they all have varying levels of these capabilities. Some allow you to do it all on their platform. Other times, they're offering more of a database that you can search and then connect with the host outside of the program or website. Either way, I get a lot of questions about them, specifically whether they are worth the money and the time investment. And candidly, I have tried several on behalf of our clients to see that there is some unicorn of searchable podcast database actually in existence. And spoiler, I haven't found the unicorn, but I have found some platforms that I think are useful for certain types of business owners and certain stages of growth and visibility. So today, that's what we were doing. We were sharing our very candid thoughts because I know that's what's going to be the most helpful to you, even if it doesn't make me a lot of friends. Just kidding. We were very respectful and honest. So let's dig into this episode with my friend, Kim Stewart. All right, Kim, are we ready to do this?
You bet. I'm excited.
Okay, listeners, Kim and I work together. She is an account executive on the Podwize group team. She handles a lot of our pitching and a lot of the strategy too for our clients. And we've been seeing this growth in not even services, more like technology, I guess you would call it, where you can go and have an access to podcast databases, podcast directories, even matching services. So we decided to do a deep dive on some of the ones that we've experienced. Some of them, we just took one for the team and dug in and beta tested, and we wanted to share the results. So Kim, any insight that you want to start the conversation with, or you just want to dig in?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's been so interesting to see how many of these, I guess we will call them services, have kind of popped up. And I think it's, just so many people want to be guests today. And, we're just so desperate to find what podcast can we guest on, right? Which I love, today, the day that we're recording this, you had an awesome episode this week on, where you should be pitching. So
Yeah,
I would definitely recommend listeners go listen to that before they listen to the show.
Well, and as you say that, when you use the word desperate, I do think a lot of people are desperate to make the searching and research part of pitching simpler.
Yes.
And I think the unfortunate answer is that in order to strategically be pitching, there's not a lot of shortcuts to take in that space. Would you agree?
Yes, definitely. And I know both of us are big proponents on building relationships with podcasters, especially if you want to guest on their show.
Yeah.
And, it's just really hard to do that when you're just relying on the technology to do that for you.
Yeah. I mean, even us internally, we have a pretty giant database, but it has been humans that have crafted it to increase our searchability, right?
Yes.
It's taken legwork of us identifying what clients have been on which shows, which ones have never gotten back to us. So there's a human component that I just don't think can ever be removed. But that said, there are some services that I think for people who are just starting to guest might be really helpful. And some are super affordable / free. And then I also think some of these can be great if you are really looking to expand way outside of your warm network. Like if you're really looking to build relationships with people that are totally cold to you, I think some of these services can help you uncover some of those people, and then you can kind of lean into building that relationship. My only hesitation on that is I think a lot of these I have not read all of the terms and services or whatever those agreements are that you just check. But I think a lot of them, you're not supposed to be contacting them outside of the platform that you're using. Have you?
Yes.
You saw
Yeah,
that
that's what I
yours,
noticed
right?
too when I was looking around. Yes.
Okay. Well, let's dig in. So we've got a massive sheet of notes. So I'll go first, and we're just going to do this really kind of informally and, ask questions too, because Kim is taking the lead on some, I'm taking the lead on others. So the first one is Podcast Hawk. And this is a newer player, I would say. It's newer to the game. I was first introduced to it on Smart Passive Income. So the founder was on Pat's show, and I think he is an advisor to the company. So a general overview, I really think it's a SaaS company. So software as a service, right, Kim?
I think so. I can picture that acronym, but I don't know what it stands for.
It's a SaaS company. So, I mean, I really think what they've done is create a technology that can scrub something, like whether it is Apple Podcast or RSS feeds or whatever the tech piece is. They're able to scrub that and come up with a database that is searchable. Their tagline is, we find all the interview podcasts on the web. We do the time-consuming legwork of finding the shows and their contact info, and our system is scanning the web 24/7 to find the newest podcasts as soon as they are released. They say they use a mix of software and human researchers to figure out which podcasts are interview-based, and then they offer up the contact info. So there's a couple of different price points for Podcast Hawk. And I don't know, Kim, have you dug into this one at all?
I have not. I do remember that episode that Pat had him on, but I have not dug into what it looks like.
Okay, cool. I did follow up that episode with a pitch to Pat of like, hey, if you want to talk about how to personalize the pitch after you find the shows, I'm happy to do that. It was denied. It's fine. Go big or go home.
That's right.
So the price point for Podcast Hawk, they do have a free trial. More on that in a second. And then they have 3 paid tiers, $49, $69, $89 a month. And what that offers you is varying levels of credits, which really end up being like a downloadable show. So you can go in, you search. I do like their search platform because it's almost like a checklist, right? And it kind of correlates to the Apple categories. So you can identify like, oh, I want business, entrepreneur, marketing shows, and you'll get search results within those criteria. But then as you kind of scroll through those results, when you find one that you think might be a good fit, you can kind of identify that as, okay, this is a show I want to kind of move forward with. And you can either download it, or in some of the higher level subscriptions, you can actually interface and pitch right from their platform. I will say, I feel like the free trial is a little stingy. And that's because you only get 10 credits. So I did a search when I was trialing it, and there was lots of shows that came back that seemed pretty interesting, but I only had the option to select 10 of them and then download that information, and then I could pitch on my own. So I guess, Kim, do you have any questions specifically about it as I've kind of given the overview?
No, it sounds great. I mean, so when you downloaded it, and this is the intent of Podcast Talk, right? You're going to download the 10 shows you've picked, and then you can pitch outside that platform and use that email address that's in that download.
Yeah. So in the starter plan and the starter paid plan, that's what I'm seeing. I think that's the only way that you can pitch. But in the 2 higher plans, you can actually email from within their platform, and you can go in and you can create pitch templates. I was happy to see there is the ability to personalize them.
Mm-hmm.
That said, there is a functionality where you can send like 50 to 100 pitches at once.
Mm-hmm.
That just raises the hair on the back of my neck of like,
yes,
are people going in and like mass sending emails that are not personalized? So that was a little bit alarming, but you can also schedule in follow up. So, I mean, I think the level of personalization is going to really depend on the user and what they want to put into it.
Yeah, that's true. Now, I did notice, now that you were talking about it and I pulled it up on my computer, and I've did a trial of Podcast Talk, I noticed like when I pulled up your show and looked into it, it has your email address, but I know for a fact you have a guest form for your show.
Yeah.
So I would hate for people to, craft a pitch to podcasts that have a guest form. And you want to, we always want to respect their process, right? So that's just something that I don't know if that can be updated easily, or if that's just, they only have an email category and that's all they want to put in Podcast Talk.
I love how you're so like professionally saying this, Kim, because I was basically like, girl, can you create a profile? Because I got my 10 shows that I wanted to look at, but I was like, well, what do they have for my contact information? So Kim went in, searched Go Pitch Yourself, got the information. It said I had 49 reviews, which is not accurate. I have more than that. And listener, if you go leave a review, that number will grow. So go for it. It had my old cover art, and we changed our cover art, I think back in December at least. It also had, because we rebranded end of 2021, it didn't have our updated web address, our updated Instagram. So there were definitely some outdated things on there, but probably enough information to decide if it would be a good fit. I was a little offended because they kind of gauge and help you decide on the shows with this like podcast score, a podcast health score.
Uh-huh.
And mine seemed pretty low, especially compared to the engagement that I know I get, the downloads I know I get, and what I've seen inside of Listen Notes. So that was just kind of I don't know how they calculate that. But anyway, so a couple of pros for Podcast Hawk. I do like the searchability that you can pick multiple categories to search for. I like the ability to download the information into a CSV file. And I do feel like the dashboard is pretty well developed and user friendly. The cons for me are the price point. I think it's pretty expensive for just getting access to the database. I think along with that lines, it does seem like some of the information is a little bit outdated. I know several of the shows that I downloaded and looked into, they don't really seem to host guests. So, I would hate to have that count as like one of my 25 contacts on one of the plans. So the question is like, who is it best for? And for this one, like, sadly, I'm not sure because I do feel like it's expensive for what you get. And I question how the pitches are received. I question how updated, the contact information on the back end, if you're sending it through one of their campaigns is. So this is not one that I would actually recommend listeners definitely go do the free trial. And if you fall in love with it, perfect. But it's definitely not one that I would spend money on.
Hey, Angie, I want to ask, I don't think we put this in our notes to go through for each of them, but when you pitch through the platform, I don't know if you've tried that or not, but I'm just curious on the host end, when they get a pitch through that platform, does it say, like, I guess if you're a member, it's going to be obvious, right? Because it's going to come through there. Well, and I guess that just answered my question because I was just thinking on the host end, what does it look like? It looks like it comes through this service.
No, I don't think so. So for Podcast Hawk, you can't send through their service unless you're at least on their second level paid plan.
Okay.
And I did see that you have a couple of different signatures that you can use. And they do have instructions on how to integrate it with your own email system.
Okay.
So I think it comes through fully branded and like white labeled, which is great. All right. Any other questions on Podcast Hawk?
No, that's very interesting.
Yeah. But I mean, I like the way they're figuring out the technology. I just think there's like some more nuance that needs to be had in the pitching part of it.
Yeah, I totally agree.
All right. Which one do you want to go over next?
Let's do podcastguest.com.
Okay. Go for it, Kim.
Okay. So for podcast hosts, it's a free service always for them to find guests in the directory. And you can see guest social links, the topics they can talk about, questions to ask them, previous appearances. It's kind of like an online media kit.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought what was cool is you can also see an audio intro clip or a YouTube video if the guest has uploaded that. So I love that part of it, that you can see pretty much everything about a guest that you might be wanting to check out.
So you can search the directory, right?
Mm-hmm, you can search the directory. Yeah. So that's going to be on the website. That won't be in the email. What I did notice, if you were looking for a guest, it has, the guest picture in the email and just a short blurb about them, which I noticed comes from a summary statement on their bio of their directory listing.
Oh.
And I think that's another episode too. You could have, Angie, of how to really, how to be strategic with that, because we often are like, I am a blah, 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 blah. We just kind of talk about ourselves in a quick little statement. But it's like when you're thinking of reaching podcast hosts, you really want to focus on what you're bringing to their listeners.
Yeah, for sure.
Because, when you're just reading bio after bio, everybody just kind of starts sounding the same. So, but for podcast guests, if you want to be featured in the directory as a guest, they have two tiers. One is $15 a month. That's their basic info in the directory. And then their premium price is $39 a month. As a premium member, then you're going to get listed in those emails that go out twice a week. Mm-hmm. You're also going to get shown on their social media channels. And then like when hosts are searching the database, the premium members are at the top of the list of members that can be shown. So, you're getting to pay to have yours up front for sure. But again, I like that you can subscribe to the emails and you can get that information in your email without having to necessarily go anywhere else if you're not, until you're interested. But I didn't like the email is what the email is. And there's a wide variety of niches that come in the email. So I was
Totally.
a little bummed about that. But the pros on that, I would say that it's all in an email. It's easy. It's twice a week. You're getting an inbox, something in your
Mhm.
inbox. You don't have to go look elsewhere for it, that it's free. And again, the cons, obviously, that you're having to pay for something that we know you can learn how to do for free on your own.
Yeah.
And there's no way to niche your results. You just see the summary. So I think for a lot of these services, it's going to be, for newbies, for new hosts and new guests that maybe they're new to the podcasting game. They haven't really built a network, that they can
Mhm.
turn to source guests and source shows and just know who the people are they need to be turning to invite on their shows and things like that. So, but I mean, I liked it. I liked that it had a lot of good information for sure.
Yeah, I like this one because I feel like it's a nice add-on to what we're already doing. Like I'm already searching for shows, we're
Mhm.
already pitching me, we're already pitching clients. But this like pops in my inbox a couple times a week and I can scan over it really quickly. I did pitch myself to one that came out like 2 weeks ago and I did get like a connect. I don't remember if it was through email or Instagram or whatever through the host. She was basically like, I'm totally overwhelmed with like all of the responses that I
Oh,
got.
wow.
So I think that's the other thing too, is part of me is like, well, I want to go just follow them on LinkedIn and like
Uh-huh. Yes.
develop, which kind of goes against their rules. And I'm a rule
Uh-huh.
follower when it comes to like a
Yeah.
business
Yeah.
setting up their expectations. And I was thinking, I was like, shoot, I should be looking at all these people that want to be guests
Uh-huh.
and go connect with them so that I can help them be a guest. But I'm not doing that. I'm being really appropriate.
And that's I guess, a pro and con, right? The
Yeah.
pro is that all their social information is there, so you can easily go find them and connect with them on
Yeah.
social. But I know, respectful out of the founder, right? That's not the purpose of this. They were really hoping you would, be on the platform and pitch through the platform. So
Yeah.
even though you're not talking about pitching them on their social channels, you are talking about,
No,
connecting with them.
connecting.
So,
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with that. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even if you're just getting started, I think it could be overwhelming because, like you said, there's such variety in what ends up in your inbox. So I
Hmm.
think if you already know, almost like Haro, right? So if you get
Yeah.
any sort of Haro emails, if you have a clear strategy and you know exactly what you're looking for, then you could easily just search those emails, like literally with your control F
Uh-huh.
for some of those key search terms, see if they pop up, and then look at those shows and consider pitching them. But I haven't pitched to many, and I definitely haven't gotten a yes or a contact. So, I just kind of question how many interviews are getting booked off of this. That's what I'm always
Yeah,
wondering.
yeah, that would be interesting to see. Yeah, definitely. And again, on that service, like I said, it was so interesting to see that all the guests were authors. And
Yeah.
so, I want to give a shout out, Angie. I don't know if you know Chandler Bolt, that is the host of the Self Publishing School podcast. I love his podcast. But he also released a book called Published, and he has a whole chapter devoted to podcast guesting as an evergreen marketing asset. And
Mm.
I love that. And he talks about it as being part of your 1 year launch. So, so
Oh,
many authors, I think, probably take advantage of things like this because they're thinking, okay, I can get my pitch out in mass, like you talked about, mass pitching, have tons and tons of interviews around my launch time. So if anybody is an author listening, I would definitely recommend you check out Chandler's podcast and his book, because I think there's a whole strategy there, like we've been talking about as well. It just doesn't have to be all done at one time. And like you said, we are not proponents of mass pitching at all. We
no.
really want to personalize it and be sharing, the message from your book. So anyway, but again, that could be a whole other episode on authors.
I want to look this up really quick. I think, is it Adam Schaubel? Is that the guy who does this?
No, it's Andrew Alleman, the founder of podcastguest.com. He just launched a brand new show last month called the Podcast Guest Show. So it'll be interesting to see what he does with that. And he's also host of the Domain Name Wire podcast, which
Mm.
has been going on for like 7 years. So he obviously knows a lot about podcast hosting for sure. And I'm
Yeah.
sure podcast guesting is why he, started this service in the beginning. So
Yeah. Really interesting. I should connect with some of these founders.
yeah,
I've
yeah.
connected with a couple of them. Okay, cool. So what do you say? Yay, nay? What's your thought?
Yeah, I do. I like it. I think it's probably for a newbie. It's the newbie host looking for guests. It's a newbie guest that hasn't guested much and probably hasn't like I said, heard Angie's episodes where you talk about I always think of it as opportunity is how I always remember it. Your one-liner podcast pitching statement, because I think, once you really get strategic and again, you start connecting with podcasters and have a community of people to turn to, you're going to figure out who you need to go research. Like I know we love to research shows by guest name. You just find out so many that way. So anyway, but yeah, I would say if you're just brand new to it, definitely you could, check it out and see what results you get. So if anybody does check any of these out though, I know Angie would love to hear back. Like what results have you seen, good or bad?
Yes, definitely shoot me a message or even email Angie at thepodwizegroup.com and let me know. That would be so fun to hear like case studies.
Yes.
Hey, are you listening to this episode thinking, yeah, Angie, this all sounds great, but I don't have the time to do it myself? Guess what? You don't have to. The Podwize Group is here to help. We offer 2 primary services to support our clients in landing and converting podcast interviews. And we offer a 45-minute Fix My Pitch strategy session for when your strategy or your pitch just needs a second set of eyes on it. Hop on over to our site, thepodwizegroup.com/services. Check out the ways that we can help you. And if one of them suits your fancy, schedule a time to connect and we'll talk through whether or not it's a good fit. So the next one, which you kind of alluded to, is PodMatch.com. And this is a division of PodPros, which really seems to be offering some technology type solutions to podcasters. And it's owned by Alex Sanfilipino. And I like PodMatch. I signed up for the free version. Are you getting the theme here, friends? A while back. And it's kind of like what I imagine an online dating app to feel like. It's been a while. So we just celebrated our 14th wedding anniversary. So I signed up and they have a really great dashboard, which I like, and you can kind of view it from the host perspective or the guest perspective. So you don't have to be a podcaster to use it. There's varying levels of plans. So the professional plan, you're able to have more matches, like kind of what Kim alluded to in the other one, to where your profile gets sort of elevated or spotlighted more than someone at the basic free plan would have. And that's $39 a month. So I feel like the free plan is plenty for me to manage on a weekly basis. Also, because I'm using it as kind of a surround sound, like another place to outreach rather than my home base. And I think that's what's interesting about a lot of these services is I still haven't found one that I think would be my home base for searching and discovering shows for me to pitch. Apple Podcast is my home base. And it's not going to change for a while. I don't fully understand like the email piece of it because there's times that I get, and it goes to Courtney's inbox, I'll get like a lot of emails and she's like, girl, you have all these PodMatch emails. Can you clean it out? So I do feel like I could probably dig in more and like better understand and better manage the notifications, but the matches often seem to be hit or miss. So like sometimes they're really closely aligned. If someone's looking to be a guest on my show, more often than not, it's not the case. Like they're just kind of spraying and praying respectfully, but like inside of the platform, kind of like, hey, I could talk about this. Would it be a good fit? I even got one a couple weeks ago that was like, hey, I haven't listened to your show, but if you think this would be a good fit, cool.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, I get that it's a bit more casual, right? Like if you're already both in this platform to pair up, it's not like it's a cold email. So maybe there is more of a level of, I don't have to do as much prep work, but I still feel like, especially when you're showing up to a place where tons of people are trying to be guests, like that is really what these platforms I feel like are leveraging is like the need, what you said, like the desperation, which, of people trying to find shows and to pair up with complementary business owners. So the matches haven't been like totally on point, but I have definitely like waded through it. I did connect with the founder on there, and he and I are supposed to connect. And I think I'm going to be a guest on his show, but I don't know. I'm just kind of torn. I do like it. I think for the free version, totally worth it. And in all fairness, I have not upgraded, so I don't know what difference, that would be. But you can reach out to other people on the platform suggesting you as the guest, or you can reach out and invite them to be a guest on your show. And by far, I get far more requests for someone to be a guest on Go Pitch Yourself than inviting me to be a guest on theirs. But I just think that's par for the course when, like I have plenty of people that I kind of handpick to be guests on my show. But I'm always looking to outreach to others. So I just think that's how it's going to be. Any questions as I'm going over this?
No, I was just thinking, hearing about all these, and again, I know both of us, relationships are super important and networking. And I just think all of us can do, so much more to help each other out. Like I was thinking, the other day we pitched a client of ours that it just didn't work out. It was a fit for the show, but it just wasn't a fit for their content calendar, I think is what it was, or they were booked. I can't remember the exact situation, but when they replied to us to say, whatever was going on, they immediately said, I have a friend that's a podcaster. You would be a perfect fit for their show. And the very next second, the introduction email came through introducing us to the other show. And then the very next minute, the other podcast host was like, yes, I want her on my show. And I was just blown away by how generous that was.
Yeah.
And I think just, all of us networking more and knowing what each other does and each other's specialties are. And then, what hosts are looking for, if we could all just share that more and more, it would just be so much easier. Because I love how you talked about these services, like if you are just trying to find other shows outside of your typical reach, it is a great way to find new shows, but then you do have to do quite a bit of research to kind of vet them for your own strategy.
Well, and I really like the dashboard for PodMatch. Like it's almost like your instant messaging, but it's, full screen inside of it. So I love the ability, even on the free plan, to have your dashboard and be able to interact. And I check it probably once a week, maybe. I'll go in and see if I have any messages and kind of poke around and see if I want to reach out to anyone else. So I really do like the internal communications that they offer, because it's not like you're sending for like Podcast Hawk, the outgoing messages. And granted, I haven't upgraded, so I don't really know, but it does feel more like pitchy. Whereas inside of PodMatch, it does feel more aligned for some reason. Like it just seems like a little less pressure and you're really connecting. One thing I was going to say, a con of their search compared to like the search console inside of Podcast Hawk, is PodMatch. If you want to explore, that's what it's called. There's really no like category checklist. Like you just have to put in a search term and see what comes back. And if you're doing it with the free version, I'm not sure how many searches you actually get per day. It's listed. But if you have a paid subscription, you can get up to like 30 profiles for every search that you make. So it's pretty standard in these that like when you upgrade, you just get more results, in some way, and then some more bells and whistles.
Yeah.
Okay. What's our next one? I think we have one more big one that is, we're going to talk about in depth. And then we've got a couple that we've kind of been made aware of.
Yeah. The next one is the Podcast Collaborative. And that's probably my favorite as far as the look and feel of it. I mean, I think Sarah, the founder, has done a beautiful job on that interface.
For sure.
And so they have a free and, of course, a paid option. And their free option, you get a monthly roundup email highlighting member, host, and guest. So, of course, that's members that have paid to be a part of Podcast Collaborative. They also, I will say, I don't know if you've ever mentioned this before on your show, Angie, but, they do have that big Podcast Collaborative Facebook group, and there's like 34,000 people in it, and they each week they have places for you to share your episodes, for you to share if you're looking for a guest or if you want to be a guest. And again, I'm going to repeat myself, but I really think we need to do an episode on that, like how you list that you want to be a guest. How
Ooh.
can you be more concise about the value you're going to bring to a host,
Yep.
and who you want to serve versus, it's your big long paragraph bio is what we
Yep.
all tend to do, right? We want to share that instead. So anyway, but their paid option is $14.99 a month as of today, and you get access to their guest and host directories. And their podcast database has 1,800 podcasts that are current and accepting guests. And then they also have a private community support, I think, in there. I did not check that out.
Okay.
But again, this one I love because it's so pretty, right? And it's so easy to use. So in the podcast directory database, they have a lot of information. You see the podcast name, the host name, the categories, description, when they launch, the number of episodes, all their, websites, the podcast link, the Apple podcast link. And, so you search it by categories or you can put in keywords. Now I was a little bummed a little bit because like a couple of the shows that I went to search out hadn't had guests on in a really long time, or, one of them hadn't even had episodes in a really long time. But I will say that's probably the case with all these services. It's just, it's not going to be extremely up to date, and I think too, just like, again, back to the networking, I think you're just going to learn as you get, again, this is one that I think about for newbies. You're just going to learn more about podcasts that are serving your target audience. And you'll start learning too more about the experts that are similar to you or comparable to you outside of these services. And you could even use that to search these services. But that's what I've noticed too, is like every time, like shows will come up and I'm like, oh, well, I know, don't even pitch this one, right? Because I know they only bring people on internally or, they're full or whatever. But I know, like I searched in one of the categories that I serve in my own business is the Christianity category. And it just pulled up the big shows like you would see very first in the category.
Yeah.
And some of those are even solo shows. So I was a little bummed about that. But on the host list, so if you're a member and you're looking at podcast host, I love that they had a lot of detailed information about the host. Exactly. Like they put in their own words what they're looking for in a guest. And I thought that was so cool compared to like what we see on Apple. The description of the show sometimes hasn't been updated in a really long time.
Yeah.
And so you don't really know until you dig into what the host does and what they're offering in their own businesses to really know where that show is going. So I love that it's in the host own voice of these are the kind of guests I'm looking for. So I really love that. But yeah, and it had all the social links for guests, their email address, that is one thing too I want to say for them is I did notice that I saw a lot of podcast forms linked. So I love that,
nice.
if you have a form, and I'll have to check and see your show, but if you have a form, it's listed there instead of an email address.
Well, so here's the interesting thing. So I'm in there now as the paid account that we have. And when you want to be a guest, they have two different, you can search their podcast discovery database, which I'm guessing they more humanly call and create. And then you have a list of hosts who are a part of the collaborative that are looking for guests. So I'm not in either. And I probably didn't fill out that I was looking for guests.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not listed in the podcast discovery database, which again is totally fine. But it also like begs the question of like, where are they getting these from? Because I've seen some, like when I searched Go Pitch Yourself, I saw one that came up where I was a guest on her show, so I don't know.
Yeah. And I imagine when somebody's building one of these from scratch, just like you and I have built things from scratch, it's like, you do kind of go pull from categories, right? You're just going to pull the shows you see in those categories and start building from there. Yeah. The thing I wish it had, which podcastguest.com had, is it has the podcastguest.com has guest pictures as well as, like I said, the audio clip or a video clip. And I love that because there's so many people like you just know from the internet, that know their faces or from social media or wherever, their faces and you'll come across it. And I'm like, oh, that looks familiar. Like I know her from somewhere, and then you can look into them further. But as with, I think some of these other databases, there was a lot of smaller shows on there. And, again, that depends on who you're targeting. And I say smaller, I think we have definitely noticed over the last couple of years, it's just, you really have to go digging, right? You can't just rely on a number. As you said, your number is outdated. But also I think we've seen that now that we kind of pulled listen notes into that equation, that we've seen, there's shows that have low reviews, but then when you look them on listen notes, they're like one of the top podcasts. And then you can go look at their social, and they have a huge social following. So I know that numbers are a funny thing.
Well, and I think it's also interesting. I just want to for the listener who's hearing us talk about a small show, what does that really entail? And it's all super subjective because for business shows, we don't have to have millions of downloads to have it be a really engaged audience and a really great place for guests to come on and meet our people. I know a lot of folks that listen to Go Pitch Yourself. When I bring guests on, they then go follow them or hire them or whatever. So we're just saying it from the sense of maybe it's like a brand new show, or if you pop over, it doesn't seem like the audience is super engaged on social. So we're just, we don't say that with any level of disrespect because I don't have a big show, you know what I mean? And many people would qualify mine as small. And I'm fine with that because it really does serve its purpose.
Yeah, it's super niche. Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing when we look at small is saying okay, well, is it just because it's a niche show and these people are still super engaged? And that's awesome. So I don't want the listeners to think because the flip of that is then people thinking, well, I'm going to have this pitch list of Smart Passive Income and Amy Porterfield's show,
which they may be, those may be listed in some of these, but I didn't see that. Maybe you did see in Podcast Hawk, but yeah, that's the thing is I think also that that's probably what people are, I know as many people as we have worked with pitching, that's usually where people want to start, right? That's what they think in their minds. Those are the shows I want to be on, but you don't want to start there, right? I mean, I know you have an episode on that, a whole different conversation, but I mean, we all start small, right? Because you're starting, but there's so many shows that, I mean, they get a really loyal audience so quickly. And you're like, oh gosh, I wish I would have pitched back when I first discovered them. So, that's the kind of the nice thing about discovering these.
I know. I love it. All right. So takeaway on the podcast collaborative.
Yeah, again, I just can't say enough about how pretty it is. I mean, Sarah, I mean, I like, if you're going to go search on things, like them being really pretty, right? But I would say I think it's really probably for someone, again, somebody new that doesn't have a new host that doesn't have relationships with guests, or, maybe they've got a huge content calendar to fill with guests, or new guests that are looking for shows and, they don't know where to start. And so they're going to go search the database. So again, I think it's really pretty interface to look through and find shows. And again, I love that they include all the information that they do.
Yeah. I have affiliate links for the Podcast Collaborative and PodMatch. And I do recommend, because Sarah has made the Podcast Collaborative so affordable, it's almost a no-brainer. So you can engage in the Facebook group, which is free, and then you can kind of poke around and look at all the directories and the listings inside of the paid. And I think they even have meetups and things like that. So she's done a really great job. And I think, like you said, it's a really great place to start if you want to get your feet wet with guesting.
I totally agree. Yeah. Yeah. And all these, definitely, if you do a free trial or if you sign up for it, again, like Angie said, connect with her on Instagram to let us know the results. But also, whatever things you find good or bad, be sure and let the founders know, so that they can improve the services as they go.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up there. There's a couple of others that we had looked at very briefly, but I think maybe we'll save those for another day because I think the 4 that we mentioned are the ones that we've really dug into the most and I feel the most confident in kind of sharing our experience with.
Yes, I totally agree.
All right, friend, I hope you enjoyed that conversation between Kim and myself and that you got some great nuggets about where to turn if you are looking to guest on shows and you want to be the one to pitch yourself. So I would love to hear your takeaways. As always, connect with me on LinkedIn at Angie Trueblood. Shoot me a connection request and let me know if you have tried any of those databases or networking sites. I would love your feedback so that we can continue to update you and your fellow Go Pitch Yourself listeners. Now, if you are looking to get more high-level support, high-touch support, I would love to have a conversation with you. We are accepting new clients starting in August. So you can schedule a time for you and I to chat if you go to thepodwisegroup.com podwize.com/services, you can get an idea of the type of work that we do, primarily our concierge or our jumpstart consulting package, and schedule a time for you and I to connect. If you know that pitching yourself is likely not something that you want to take on in whole and that you want some level of support, I would love to chat with you about what that might look like. All right, until our next Summer Lovin episode, be well and be visible. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Go Pitch Yourself. If you found this episode to be helpful, friend, you would be blown away by what we can accomplish together. Here are 2 next best steps. 1, be sure to sign up for our bi-weekly newsletter. That is twice a month, if that term confuses you as much as it does me. Each week that our episodes drop, I send an action-focused email, including an insider tip of the week based on the work that we do behind the scenes in our clients' business. For example, a recent tip of the week included how to estimate how large a podcast audience is. To get access to this exclusive content, pop on over to the podwizegroup.com/pitches and sign up. As a special thank you, you'll get your first insider tip of the week as access to 6 pitches my team and I have sent that were accepted, including the core components of any great pitch. Number 2, schedule a call with me to figure out which of our services, if any, would be a good fit for you. We have a variety of ways to support you and your team in helping grow your business through podcast guesting, and I am pretty skilled at helping identify pain points and solutions. Hop over to the podwizegroup.com/services and grab a spot on my calendar at the bottom of the page.